The autumn air of Paris in 1963 was heavy with silence, as if even the city itself had stopped to listen. From the cathedral to the crowded boulevards, tens of thousands gathered to watch a tiny coffin pass through their midst. Inside lay a woman whose voice had once risen above the smoke of cafes and the noise of cabarets, whose song had carried both hope and despair into the hearts of strangers. Edith Piaf, the Sparrow of Paris, had died at the age of only 47, but her funeral was unlike that of most mortals. Her body was frail, her years few, yet her memory filled the air with a presence that seemed to expand beyond time. Before we begin our long wandering through her story, I ask you, gentle listener, to pause with me. Tell me, if you will, in the comments below, where and when these words find you. Perhaps at night as you drift toward sleep, perhaps in a quiet morning hour before the day begins. In this way, our voices, scattered across lands and oceans, form a global circle of memory. And if these journeys into the past bring you comfort, consider pressing the button to subscribe so that our stories may continue to travel together. The story of Edith Piaf begins at its end with the procession of her funeral. Imagine the streets of Paris in October, lined with mourners whose eyes search for something they cannot name. The leaves fall in pale spirals onto black coats and cobblestones, and the air carries the faint smell of wax from the candles left burning in narrow windows. Some among the crowd whisper lines from her songs, others cross themselves, and still others remain motionless, their silence more powerful than any words. There's something curious about this gathering. Edith Piaf had been, all her life, a woman entangled in scandal. She had been judged for her lovers, for her quarrels, for her drinking, for the haze of morphine that clouded her final years. She had been accused, suspected, pitied, adored, and mocked. The church itself hesitated to grant her a funeral mass, as though her life had strayed too far from respectability. And yet, despite the official doubts, despite the whispers of propriety, the people came. They came in tens of thousands, pressing so tightly in the streets that traffic fell silent. It is said that Paris had not seen such mourning since the liberation at the end of the war. Why did they come? Why do human beings, who so often judge, who so often condemn, still find themselves gathering in reverence for those whose lives were riddled with imperfection? Perhaps because Piaf's songs had spoken the unspoken. Her voice was not polished, not gentle, not flawless in the way of singers trained in conservatories. It was raw, trembling, sometimes breaking, sometimes soaring. It was the voice of wounds turned outward, and in that voice the people heard themselves, their own fragile loves and their own hidden losses. She had lived in public what they endured in silence. As the coffin passed, some remembered her earliest melodies, the little sparrow singing in smoky bars before the war. Others recalled La Vie en Rose, that strange mixture of naive hope and bruised tenderness, a song that seemed to offer a dream even as it confessed its fragility. Still others thought of the laments she carried into her later years, each note heavy with the memory of lost love and the shadow of death. To walk in that funeral was to walk among one's own memories, for Piaf's songs had woven themselves into the private fabric of countless lives. The image of her funeral stands as a paradox, a threshold between her life and her legend. For in death the scandals softened and the songs remained. This is often the way of things. What is fleeting in flesh becomes enduring in art. Yet, one might ask, is art merely a disguise, a veil over the broken body and the tumultuous heart? Or is it the truer self, the essence that outlives all scandal? The October air that day carried not only the weight of mourning, but also the echo of her final years. Her body had already been a ruin before her passing. She had suffered accidents that shattered her bones, illnesses that gnawed at her strength, and addictions that pulled her further into frailty. At the end, she was a small, fragile figure, scarcely larger than the Sparrow by which she had once been nicknamed, and yet she had sung to the last, defying the silence that her body threatened to impose. Perhaps that is why the people came in such numbers, to honor a defiance that mirrored their own struggle against the inevitability of decline. As the coffin moved slowly forward, one could almost hear, beneath the murmurs of the crowd, the faint echo of her songs. Was it imagination, or did the very stones of Paris hold her voice? The city had shaped her, and she, in return, had sung it into legend. The cafes, the alleys, the theaters, the bridges, each had been touched by her presence. To mourn her was to mourn not only a singer but an era, a way of feeling that seemed inseparable from the streets themselves. It is worth pausing to consider the image of a sparrow. Why did Louis Leplay, the cabaret owner who first discovered her, call her La Môme Piaf, the little sparrow? A sparrow is a common bird, overlooked among the brighter plumage of nightingales and swans. It is fragile, quick, restless, easily wounded, yet it endures. It survives in city streets, finding crumbs where others would starve. Its song is not elaborate, but it is persistent, insistent. The sparrow sings not to dazzle, but to remind the world of its own smallness and endurance. Perhaps Edith Piaf's life was bound to this image from the beginning. Perhaps the funeral, with its mass of ordinary people gathered in mourning, was the final testimony to that small bird's power. Still, even in that moment of unity, questions remained. Did those who came truly know her? Or did they know only the songs, the persona, the myth? To know Edith Piaf was to confront contradictions, piety and sin, tenderness and cruelty, devotion and betrayal. She was capable of giving everything to a lover, and yet capable also of driving them away with her storm of demands. She could inspire loyalty, and she could wound with her restless hunger. Perhaps the funeral did not resolve these contradictions, but held them together, just as her voice had always done. As the day waned and the coffin disappeared from sight, the city settled once more into its ordinary rhythm. But something lingered in the air, a tremor of sound and memory. The sparrow was gone, yet her song remained, echoing in the hearts of those who had gathered. And this is where we must begin, at the end, with the paradox of a woman both condemned and adored, fragile and indomitable, scandalous and saintly in the eyes of those who heard her. The silence of that funeral is the threshold through which we now pass, back into the alleys of Belleville, back into the childhood of the girl who would one day be known to all as Edith Piaf. From the silence of that funeral, our thoughts drift backward like smoke carried by the wind, returning to the place where the story began, to a cold district of Paris called Belleville, where narrow streets sloped downward and the stones were darkened by years of rain and footsteps. It was here, on the 19th of December in the year 1915, that a frail infant was born and given the name Edith Giovanna Gassion. Her arrival was unremarkable to the world, yet in that moment Paris received the voice that would one day rise above its clamor. The child's cry, it is said, was no louder than that of any other newborn, but within that tiny frame a seed of song had already been planted, one that would one day unfold in tones of both sorrow and exultation. Her father, Louis Alphonse, was a man of the circus, an acrobat who traveled from town to town in pursuit of applause, his hands hardened by rope and his body shaped by the dangerous grace of the high wire. Her mother, Annetta Maillard, was a singer of Italian blood, though her voice did not carry her far. She too knew the hunger of the streets, the disappointment of empty halls. Neither parent was prepared to care for the infant they had brought into the world. Annetta, restless and impoverished, soon vanished into her own struggles. Lewis, seeking work, entrusted the child to the hands of others. Thus, Edith's earliest memories would not be those of parental tenderness, but of absence, of the vastness of a world where she seemed small and overlooked. Some say she was left for a time with her grandmother in Normandy, a woman who kept a brothel. Imagine the rooms filled with heavy perfume, the muffled laughter of women, the occasional burst of argument carried through thin walls. In such a place, little Edith learned of life's harshness, not from tales or lessons, but from the daily reality of those around her. There, among women who had themselves been cast aside by respectability, she found something resembling care. They fed her when they could, they held her when she cried, and though the world might have judged their lives, their rough tenderness was perhaps the first taste of human warmth the child would know. When Edith was still very small, illness struck. A condition of the eyes left her nearly blind. For years she lived in a blur of shadows and shifting light, uncertain of shapes, guided more by touch and sound than by sight. To a child, such an affliction must have seemed like a prison, yet it is tempting to wonder whether this early darkness sharpened another sense, whether in the absence of clear vision, her ears grew attuned to the subtle rhythms of the world, the creak of floorboards, the echo of footsteps, the rise and fall of voices. Perhaps the roots of her extraordinary musical gift were nourished in that darkness. Or perhaps such speculation is only the longing of those who wish to find purpose in suffering. We cannot know. Her father, returning from military service, took her back under his care. Their life together was not steady. He earned what he could by performing on the streets, and Edith often accompanied him, learning to stand before strangers and offer them her small talent in exchange for coins. The circus tricks of her father and the raw singing of his daughter became their livelihood. What a strange childhood it must have been, nights without warmth, meals uncertain, yet always surrounded by the movement of crowds and the necessity of display. For Edith, performance was never a matter of art or vanity. It was survival, as essential as bread. It is said that in 1925, when she was about 10 years old, her blindness lifted after a pilgrimage. Her grandmother, desperate and devout, had taken her to the shrine of Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, praying fervently for healing. Soon after, Edith's sight returned. The doctors might have explained it otherwise, but to the child and those around her, it was a miracle. How could such an event not shape the imagination of a girl destined to sing of faith and despair in equal measure? The figure of Sainte Thérèse would remain in her heart, a presence to whom she turned in moments of crisis throughout her life. The Paris of her youth was not the Paris of postcards. Belleville was a place of poverty, where narrow streets carried the smells of cooking and refuse together, and where children played barefoot under the watch of weary mothers. Yet within those streets were also the rhythms of language, the cries of vendors, the laughter of neighbors, the music of organ grinders. It was a school of sound, teaching Edith to listen to the heartbeat of ordinary life. Her songs, later celebrated on grand stages, would never lose the accent of those streets. She did not disguise her origins in polished diction. She sang as she had spoken, carrying the rough music of Belleville into every lyric. In those years, one imagines her small figure perched in doorways or on steps, humming to herself, shaping her voice without knowing it. Did she already sense that her voice could be her weapon, her means of carving space in an indifferent world? Or was it only instinct, the natural cry of a child who wished to be heard? Each life carries such mysteries. We may try to impose patterns, to say that suffering forged her art, that neglect shaped her hunger for love, that poverty gave her the rawness of her sound. Yet the truth may be both simpler and more elusive. Edith Piaf was what she was, a singular voice born from circumstances impossible to repeat. By the time she reached her teens, she was already singing in public. At first, it was nothing more than the rough stages of the street, a few songs offered to passers-by in exchange for a coin or a glance. She learned quickly that the world did not reward hesitation. To sing with force was to command attention. To sing with emotion was to awaken generosity. Each performance was an exchange, a fragile contract between the singer and the stranger. And though she was still a child, she understood the terms of that contract as clearly as any adult. But if we step back and consider the wider world in those years, we see that her childhood coincided with an era of upheaval. Europe was scarred by the First World War. France carried its wounds visibly in the bodies of veterans, in the widows dressed in black, in the hunger that lingered through the 1920s. The children of that generation grew up amid uncertainty. Perhaps this explains why Piaf's songs, later in life, resonated so deeply with people of all backgrounds. She was not singing from a distance. She was born from the same soil of hardship. Her voice was not an ornament placed atop life's difficulties. It was the cry from within them. As we leave her childhood for the moment, the image that remains is of a small girl standing under the glow of a street lamp in Belleville, her hair unkempt, her eyes wide, her hands clenched around a tin cup. Around her, the murmurs of the city continue, indifferent. Yet from her mouth rises a sound that cuts through the night, a sound that does not beg, but declares existence. That sound, fragile and insistent, is the beginning of all that was to come. And so we end this part not with an answer, but with a question. If the voice of Edith Piaf was already present in the streets of her childhood, was it destiny that carried her forward? Or was it merely the stubborn persistence of a sparrow who refused to be silenced? The footsteps in the alleyway linger, fading slowly into the dark. And from those footsteps we pass to the next stage of her journey, where the blind child of Belleville becomes the awakening singer, finding in song a way to carve meaning from the shadows. The footsteps in the alley fade, and in their silence another sound emerges, the quiet breath of a child, feeling her way through the shadows of near blindness. Edith's world in those early years was not painted with sharp outlines or brilliant colors. Instead, it was made of blurred shapes, dim lights, and the music of voices that drifted toward her in half-heard fragments. She touched walls to know where she was. She traced the edges of objects with her fingers, as if learning their language through skin. And above all, she listened. There is a curious mystery in the lives of those who suffer blindness and later regain sight. Some describe the world as overwhelming, too bright, too chaotic. But while the eyes are closed, the ears open wide. Edith must have carried in those dark years a library of sounds more intimate than most of us will ever know. The sound of a door creaking in her grandmother's brothel, the laughter of women drifting into sorrow at dawn, the shuffle of shoes across worn floors, the distant hum of the city. These sounds, stored in memory, became her landscape. When her grandmother, clutching at hope, took her to the shrine of Sainte Thérèse of Lisieux, Edith could not have guessed what awaited her. The journey itself would have been long for a child, each step a burden, each church bell along the road a reminder of what was being asked. At the shrine they prayed, candles flickering, incense rising like thin strands of faith. In later years, Edith would speak of this pilgrimage as the turning point, the miracle that restored her sight. Whether one believes in the intervention of the saint or in the mysteries of the body's healing, the truth is that her eyes opened. The world, once blurred, sharpened into clarity, and she, the child who had learned to listen so deeply, now joined her ears to her eyes. This return of vision was not the end of her struggle, but the beginning of something else. Imagine the wonder of seeing faces clearly for the first time, of watching the expression that accompanies a laugh, of catching the tears that follow a whispered word. Edith's songs in later years were filled with this ability to capture not only the sound, but also the texture of emotion. Perhaps this gift was born in the double experience of blindness and recovery, the deprivation that made her attentive and the return of sight that gave her a reason to sing of beauty. Her father, the acrobat, often performed on the streets to earn bread. Edith would sometimes stand beside him, Her small voice offered timidly at first. The people passing by might have paused, surprised by the sound that issued from such a slight figure. She was no taller than a child's toy doll, her thin arms barely able to carry the weight of a gesture. Yet when she opened her mouth, there was something in her tone, raw, direct, unpolished, but charged with emotion, that pierced the indifference of the street. Coins would clatter into the cup. The father bowed, the daughter sang, and together they endured. It is said that Edith, by her mid-teens, had already discovered the strange alchemy of her voice. She understood that if she sang with mere prettiness, people listened politely and walked on. But if she allowed her voice to break, if she poured into it the ache she had already known in her young life, the people stopped. They not only stopped, they felt, and once they felt, they gave. This was the beginning of a lifelong truth. Her voice was not crafted in luxury, but in necessity. Every note carried hunger. Every phrase carried survival. The world of Belleville, with its cramped rooms and narrow streets, offered her no promise of fame. Yet within its rough corners, she tested her gift again and again. One can picture her at twilight, standing near a cafe where workers gathered after long shifts, the smell of tobacco and sweat in the air. Her song would rise, cutting through laughter, commanding silence, and then, for a brief moment, the crowd would soften. The Sparrow had found her weapon, and it was not beauty alone, but truth. There is a strange paradox in music. A song is both deeply personal and utterly shared. When Edith sang, she was drawing from her own wounds, yet the sound belonged instantly to those who heard it. This paradox became the thread of her life. She lived a childhood of abandonment and hardship, yet she gave those experiences back to the world in melodies that others claimed as their own. Perhaps it is here we find the reason for her enduring power. She did not sing about herself as much as she sang herself into others. But what was awakening in her during these years was not only the voice of survival, but the voice of longing. Already as a girl, she yearned for something more than the streets could give. The moments when she sang and people listened offered her glimpses of another life, a life where her cry might fill not only a corner of Belleville, but the vast halls of Paris. Did she already dream of such things? Or was it enough, at that time, to taste the brief silence of strangers moved by her voice? We do not know. Yet the seeds were there. Her faith, too, seemed to deepen after her recovery of sight. She would later speak often of Sainte Thérèse, keeping a small image of the saint close to her bed, as if clinging to the memory of the miracle. Faith for Edith was never the quiet, orderly devotion of the respectable. It was wild, desperate like her songs, full of pleading, full of contradiction. She prayed not as one who believed she deserved, but as one who begged. And this, too, seeped into her music. Her voice often sounded like a prayer shouted into the night, a demand that someone, somewhere, must listen. As she grew older, the streets remained her stage. She sang at markets, at corners, at gatherings of workers. The coins kept her alive, but what truly nourished her was the power she felt each time her voice broke through indifference. For a girl who had known neglect from her own mother and absence from her father, this attention was a substitute for love, and yet it was never quite enough. The applause of strangers cannot replace the arms of a parent, nor can coins replace tenderness. This hunger would follow her into adulthood, shaping her romances, her friendships, her addictions. She would always sing as one still searching for an embrace she never received. The awakening of her voice was therefore not only the discovery of sound, but the discovery of self. Each note told her that she existed, that she could leave a mark on the world, that she was not invisible. For a child who had once lived in darkness, who had once been overlooked and forgotten, this was a revelation as vital as bread or sight. To sing was to be. As twilight settled on those early years, one might imagine her small figure walking home after a long day of singing, the streets emptying, the echoes of laughter fading. The coins rattled in her pocket, a fragile proof of survival. The glow of a street lamp cast her shadow long on the stones, and though her voice was tired, she hummed still, unwilling to let silence take her. That humming carried her forward from the alleys of Belleville toward the uncertain path of destiny. The image remains. A child, once blind, now seeing, singing to survive, her voice already trembling with truths she did not yet understand. That is how the Sparrow awoke. And as the coins fall into the tin cup, echoing against the cold stone, we step forward into the next chapter, where the streets themselves become her stage, and Paris begins to listen more closely to the little sparrow's cry. The faint clatter of coins in the tin cup lingers, echoing against the walls of Belleville, and then the sound carries outward, flowing into the larger streets of Paris. These streets were not paved with promise. They were cracked, uneven, damp with rain in winter, and heavy with dust in summer. Yet for Edith, they were more than stone and mud. They were a stage, wide and unbounded, where any passerby might become her audience, and any corner could turn into a theater. Paris itself was her first true hall, and though she did not know it yet, it was also her first and most loyal listener. By the time Edith reached her mid-teens, she was no longer a child carried in the arms of her father. She was a girl who stood on her own, small in stature yet already fierce in her will. The city was loud around her. Horses still clattered in some districts, though the hum of automobiles had begun to take their place. Market sellers shouted their prices, children darted through narrow lanes, and the smell of roasted chestnuts mingled with smoke rising from cheap cafes. In this restless current of sound and movement, Edith placed herself, lifting her voice above the din. Her songs were not yet the polished anthems that would one day fill theaters. They were simple, borrowed melodies, often popular ballads that others already knew. But when Edith sang them, something shifted. The words seemed to acquire weight, as if her voice carried not only the melody, but also the very marrow of human experience. Listeners stopped, coins loosened in hands, and for a moment even the harshness of the city softened. The sparrow's cry, fragile yet defiant, broke through. This street-singing life was precarious. Some nights there was enough for bread and perhaps a little wine. Other nights she returned with scarcely anything. Hunger was her frequent companion, as was cold. She wrapped herself in thin coats against the biting winds that swept through the avenues. Yet she did not retreat. The street was her classroom, her rehearsal room, and her proving ground. In it she learned not only how to sing, but how to command attention, how to read the faces of those who passed by, how to stretch a note until it touched something buried in a stranger's heart. One must imagine her there, standing in the dim circle of light beneath a street lamp, her hair unkempt, her eyes large and searching. Around her the crowd surged, men in work clothes, women carrying baskets, soldiers moving with weary strides, lovers whispering close together. She saw them all, and she sang as though she belonged to each of them. The sparrow was still nameless in fame, yet her voice was already weaving invisible threads between her and the life of the city. It was during these years that she began to understand the double nature of song. To sing was both an act of survival and an act of confession. She could not hide within her voice. It exposed her entirely. Each note revealed hunger, loneliness, and longing. Yet this vulnerability became her power. The people who stopped to listen did not admire her technique, for she had none. They heard themselves in her trembling tones. The tired worker, the lonely widow, the soldier dreaming of home, all felt something of their own burden lifted when the little girl sang. But street singing also brought danger. Not all who lingered meant kindness. Edith was young, small, and vulnerable. The city's night had its predators, and more than once she had to defend herself or rely on others to shield her. These experiences hardened her quickly. She learned to speak sharply when threatened, to hold herself with a defiance that belied her size. This defiance would remain with her for life, shaping not only her stage presence, but her entire way of moving through the world. Still, amid hardship and threat, there were moments of strange beauty. A winter evening when snowflakes drifted through the yellow light of gas lamps and Edith's voice rose like a thread of warmth. A spring afternoon when blossoms scattered in the breeze and her song mingled with the scent of lilacs. These fleeting instances, unnoticed by most, were fragments of grace. They whispered to her that even in a world of poverty, music could create a space where sorrow and joy met, if only for a heartbeat. She was not entirely alone in those years. Friends from the street, fellow performers, and companions of poverty formed a rough circle around her. Some joined her in duets, others offered protection, still others shared what little they had. It was a world of shifting alliances, but within it, Edith learned the bonds of comradeship that arise among the marginalized. These bonds would echo later in her life, when she drew young singers and poets into her orbit, offering them both chaos and opportunity. Her relationship with her father remained uncertain, sometimes present, sometimes absent. He saw in her talent a way to increase their earnings, yet he also recognized that she was becoming something more than an accompaniment to his act. Edith herself was restless. She did not wish to remain in the shadow of anyone. She wanted to step forward to let her voice carry her beyond the streets. The dream was vague, but it was there, to be heard, truly heard, not only by passers-by but by the city itself. It is worth asking, in these years of hardship and wandering, whether Edith understood the magnitude of her gift. Did she know she possessed something rare, or did she believe she was only another singer of the street? Memory suggests that she carried both humility and fierce conviction. She doubted herself constantly, yet she also demanded space, demanded recognition. Perhaps this contradiction was essential, for without doubt her songs would not have trembled with such humanity, and without conviction they would never have risen above the noise of Paris. The streets of the city thus became her first theater. No ticket was needed, no curtain drawn. Each passerby was both audience and critic, granting their attention for a moment or none at all. And in this theater, Edith honed the qualities that would define her art: raw emotion, fearless exposure, and a refusal to sing half-heartedly. Every note was an act of survival, every phrase a plea for acknowledgement. As the years passed, the sparrow's cry grew stronger. Her voice, once a fragile thread, deepened with resonance. Those who heard her began to speak of her, passing her name from ear to ear. She was still far from the cabarets and concert halls, but the city had begun to notice. And once Paris notices, the world often follows. So the image with which we leave this chapter is of Edith, standing in the circle of a street lamp, her small figure dwarfed by the vastness of the city, yet her voice carrying farther than the stones, farther than the alleys, into the very marrow of those who stop to listen. She is still unknown, still poor, still a sparrow among the flocks of pigeons that filled the rooftops. But in her song there is already the tremor of destiny. The lamp flickers, the crowd disperses, and Edith is left alone, her shadow stretching across the cobblestones. And as that shadow fades into the mist of Paris, another figure waits in the wings, a man who will soon discover her, who will lift her from the streets into the cabaret, and who will give her the name that the world would never forget. The street lamp flickers, its glow bending across the stones, and in that trembling light, another figure lingers in the shadows, watching the little sparrow sing. He is not like the others who stop out of passing curiosity, dropping a coin before moving on. He stands longer, listening, his head tilted, his gaze searching not merely for entertainment, but for something rare, something that could be carried from the street into the heart of the cabaret. This man is Louis Leplay, owner of a small but fashionable club near the Champs-Élysées, and his ear is sharp, tuned to the possibility of discovery. The year is 1935. Paris is alive with cabaret culture, its evenings filled with music and laughter, its stages crowded with singers who hope to become the next great star. Yet the city is also restless, still scarred by the war of 2 decades before, and already darkened by the shadow of another conflict rising beyond its borders. People seek distraction, yet they also seek truth. They want to be moved, to feel their own struggles reflected in art. This is what Louis hears in the voice of the small girl standing beneath the lamp. She is no polished beauty, no trained performer, but her song carries the weight of lived experience. It is rough and unrefined, but it is unmistakably real. Le Play approaches her, and in that moment her life begins to turn. Edith, wary of strangers, eyes him with suspicion. She has known too well the dangers of men who make promises. Yet Louis is different. He speaks not with the empty charm of a suitor, but with the brisk assurance of a man who sees potential. He invites her to sing at his club, the Gurneys. At first, she hesitates, uncertain whether to believe him, but something in his manner convinces her that this is not trickery. And so the little Sparrow, who has sung only to the streets, agrees to step onto a new stage. Her first appearances at Gurney's are uncertain. She is small, only 4 feet 10 inches in height, and the stage seems to dwarf her. Under the harsh lights, she appears fragile, almost childlike. The audience murmurs, some amused, some doubtful. Yet when she opens her mouth, the room changes. The chatter stills. The laughter fades. Her voice, trembling yet fierce, rises through the smoke-filled air, and suddenly all eyes are upon her. She sings not with the elegance of the salon, but with the raw cry of the street. And it is precisely this rawness that grips the listeners. They hear truth, and truth is rarer than beauty. Le Play, delighted, decides to give her a stage name. La Môme Piaf, he calls her, the little sparrow. The name sticks, for it captures not only her size but her essence. A sparrow is common, fragile, often overlooked, yet its song is persistent, its survival assured even in the harshest environments. Edith herself embraces the name. It is not glamorous, but it is honest. She is indeed a sparrow, and she will sing as one. Her fame begins to spread. Word of the little Sparrow reaches beyond the walls of Gurney's. Critics write of her with fascination, noting the strange power of her voice, its ability to wring tears from hardened men and silence from crowded rooms. Some are skeptical. How could such a small, untrained singer command such attention? But others recognize that she has tapped into something elemental, something no conservatory could teach. She is not a product of training, but of life itself, and in her voice Paris hears its own soul. For Edith, these first months of recognition are intoxicating. She has known only poverty and hunger, and now she is given clothes, food, applause. Yet with recognition comes fear. The cabaret world is fickle. Applause can turn to mockery, admiration to rejection. She is terrified of losing what she has gained, of slipping back into the shadows of the street. This fear will never leave her. It will haunt her even in the height of her fame. She will always sing as if she must prove herself anew, as if each song might be her last chance to hold the audience. Le Play becomes not only her manager, but her protector. He teaches her how to stand on stage, how to hold the microphone, how to channel her raw energy into performance without losing its authenticity. Yet he does not polish her too much. He knows that her power lies in her roughness, in the sense that she sings not from artifice, but from lived pain. He encourages her to keep her street accent, to let her songs carry the flavor of Belleville. This decision is crucial, for in refusing refinement, Piaf becomes the voice of the people. She is not distant, not untouchable, but one of them. Yet even as her career begins, shadows gather. The cabaret world is full of dangers, jealousy, rivalry, crime. Edith's associations with street figures follow her into this new life. Some whisper that she is not entirely left behind the underworld of Belleville. Others spread rumors about her private life, questioning her morality. Scandal is never far from her, and it will become a constant companion throughout her career. But for the moment, the power of her voice is enough to drown the whispers. In those early nights at Gurney's, one can imagine the scene: smoke curling upward, glasses clinking, the murmur of conversation stilled as Edith steps forward. The lights catch her face, pale and sharp, her eyes wide with intensity. She grips the microphone as if it were a lifeline, and then the first notes rise. The audience, expecting entertainment, receives instead confession. They feel as though the little sparrow is singing directly to them, unveiling her own wounds so that theirs might be less heavy. This is the essence of her art, and it is born here, in the cabaret that first embraced her. The transformation is swift, yet within it Edith remains restless. She is grateful to LaPlay, yet she is also aware of how fragile her position is. She knows that fame built on novelty can vanish quickly. She must prove herself not once but continually with each song, each night. This urgency seeps into her performances, giving them a fevered quality. She sings not as if she has time to spare, but as if the world might end when the last note fades. Audiences feel this urgency, and they respond with devotion. So it is that the Sparrow, lifted from the alleys of Belleville, perches now on the stage of Gurney's, her voice carrying beyond the walls into the streets of Paris. Yet even in this moment of rising fortune, one hears a faint tremor of foreboding. For the man who discovered her, who gave her the name that would follow her forever, would soon meet a violent fate, and with his death, scandal would once again cling to the little sparrow, threatening to undo the fragile wings of her ascent. The curtain falls on her early triumphs, but in the distance a door slams shut in the night, and its echo carries us forward to the shadows that will soon surround her. The door slams in the night, its echo reverberating through the narrow corridors of memory, and behind that sound lies the sudden silence of Louis LaPlay's absence. It is April 1936 when news spreads across Paris that the cabaret owner, the man who first lifted Edith Piaf from the pavements into the glow of stage lights, has been found dead in his apartment. The manner of his death is violent. He has been shot, and the newspapers seize upon the details with relish. Paris is a city that thrives on scandal, and here is a story with all the elements that intrigue: crime, the underworld, and a rising star whose name is suddenly tangled in the shadows of suspicion. For Edith, the news is not only a blow of grief, but also a collapse of security. She had trusted LaPlay, leaned on him, allowed him to shape her fragile ascent. Now he is gone, and worse, the police and the press turn their eyes toward her. Questions are raised about her connections to the rough circles of Belleville, to men whose reputations are steeped in crime. It is whispered that she brought danger to LaPlay's door, that her past, never far behind, has followed her into this new world of cabaret. She is interrogated, her name splashed across headlines, her innocence doubted. For a moment it seems as though the sparrow's wings, only just spread, will be broken before she has even flown. The scandal is merciless. In a city where reputation is everything, she becomes, overnight, not the darling of the cabaret but a figure of suspicion. Some clubs refuse to book her. Audiences turn cold. To be associated with murder, even without guilt, is enough to stain her. For a girl who has clawed her way up from the street, the fall back into obscurity is swift and cruel. The same public that had marveled at her raw power now mutters about her character, her morality, her associations. Paris is a fickle lover, and Edith tastes its betrayal early. Imagine her in those weeks, sitting in a small rented room, the curtains drawn against the eyes of the city, her hands restless in her lap. She is 20 years old, fragile in body yet already scarred by loss. The man who believed in her has been buried, her career lies in ruins, and she is left with only her voice. It would have been easy to surrender, to vanish once more into the anonymity of the streets. Yet Edith is not one to surrender. She is wounded, yes, but within her the stubborn pulse of survival beats stronger. It is in this moment of near destruction that others step forward to help her rebuild. Among them is Raymond Asso, a poet and lyricist who will become both her mentor and her lover. He sees what Le Play had seen, a voice of truth, a vessel of emotion that cannot be silenced by scandal. He teaches her discipline, insists that she take her gift seriously, that she refine without losing her rawness. With him, she begins to shape not only her voice but also her identity. No longer simply the girl from Belleville, she is becoming Edith Piaf, the sparrow whose song carries sorrow and resilience in equal measure. The scandal of Le Play's death does not vanish entirely. It will cling to her for years, resurfacing whenever critics wish to remind her of her beginnings. Yet within the shadow of suspicion, something else is forged. Edith learns that fame is not a gift, but a battle. She learns that she must defend herself not only against hunger and poverty, but also against the cruelty of gossip and the weight of judgment. This lesson will mark her forever. She will fight for her career as fiercely as she fought for bread in her childhood, and every song she sings will carry the urgency of someone who knows how quickly everything can be lost. There is also, in this period, the deepening of her connection to sorrow. To lose her first protector in such a violent way and to bear the burden of unjust suspicion carved into her a grief that never quite healed. When she later sang of betrayal, of loss, of despair, it was not mere performance. It was the memory of those nights when Paris turned its back, when she sat alone with the knowledge that innocence was no shield against rumor. Her songs became confessions, each one carrying a residue of the shadows that had nearly destroyed her. What is it about scandal that fascinates us? Why do we listen more intently to a singer who has been marked by suspicion? Perhaps because art and transgression seem intertwined, because the wound gives weight to the voice. Edith herself seemed to embody this paradox. She was both sinner and saint in the eyes of the public, condemned for her associations, yet revered for her songs. And in the end, it was precisely this mixture that gave her an authenticity no polished performer could match. She did not sing from a place of innocence, but from the depths of imperfection, and it was there that her audience recognized themselves. The years following Le Play's death were difficult, yet they also forged her identity. She worked harder, sang with greater intensity, and allowed her art to carry the marks of her wounds. She did not deny the shadows, but wove them into her performances. This was her defiance. To transform suspicion into song, to turn scandal into strength. One imagines her returning to the stage after the storm had passed, stepping once more into the circle of light, the audience waiting to see whether the sparrow had survived. She stands small, almost fragile, her black dress plain, her eyes luminous with both fear and defiance. And then she sings. The room, skeptical at first, is soon hushed. They cannot resist. The voice is still there, sharper now, more urgent, carrying not only melody but also the echo of survival. The scandal has scarred her, but it has also deepened her song. The sparrow does not fall, it flies higher. As this chapter closes, the sound that remains is not the gunshot that killed Louis Le Play, nor the murmur of suspicion that followed, but the sound of Edith's voice rising once again in defiance of silence. Yet even in this triumph, there's a candle burning low on a table, its flame flickering on sheets of music. In its light, another figure waits, Raymond Asso, who will shape her into the artist she was meant to become, and who will teach her how to craft confession into chanson. The candle flickers on the table, its light quivering across the pages of sheet music, and in that glow stands the figure of Raymond Asso, pen in hand, eyes fixed upon the small woman whose voice has already begun to carve its way into the heart of Paris. He is no stranger to words. A poet, a lyricist, a man seasoned by war and weariness, he has known the discipline of the army and the temptations of the cabaret. When he meets Edith Piaf, he recognizes immediately that she is more than a singer of chance melodies. She is a vessel. But a vessel, he knows, must be shaped. It is the late 1930s, and Piaf's career, nearly broken by the scandal of Louis Leplay's murder, needs direction. Asso steps into this role with both firmness and tenderness. He becomes her mentor, her teacher, and for a time, her lover. He is strict with her, demanding seriousness, insisting that she treat her voice not as a casual gift, but as an instrument that must be respected. He teaches her how to stand on stage without fidgeting, how to hold herself with dignity, how to let silence before a note create anticipation. These lessons are not easy for Edith, who has always sung as if her life depended on the immediacy of sound. Yet slowly she begins to see that discipline need not dilute truth. It can give it greater force. Alongside Asso appears another crucial figure, Marguerite Monod, a composer and pianist whose melodies will entwine themselves with Piaf's voice for decades to come. Where Asso provides words and discipline, Monod offers music, weaving songs that seem to rise naturally from the Sparrow's soul. The three form a strange trinity: mentor, composer, singer, each giving shape to the other. Together they refine what Edith already possesses, the ability to make every song sound like a confession. Asso encourages her to focus on songs that mirror her own life, stories of abandonment, longing, betrayal, and resilience. He knows that her greatest strength lies not in singing of fantasies, but of lived wounds. And so her repertoire begins to shift. No longer is she the street girl repeating popular tunes. She becomes the interpreter of her own existence, singing songs that sound less like entertainment and more like truth uttered aloud. It is during this period that she adopts the black dress, plain and unadorned, which will become her signature. Asso insists upon it. He wants nothing to distract from the voice, nothing to soften its stark impact. The black dress frames her small figure, lending her a kind of severe dignity, turning her fragility into presence. Under the spotlight, she appears almost spectral, a tiny figure wrapped in shadow, her face the only light, her voice the only adornment. The sparrow, stripped of all ornament, becomes eternal. The discipline Asso demands extends beyond performance. He insists she train her memory, her diction, her understanding of lyrics. She resists at times, her fiery nature clashing with his sternness. Yet she cannot deny that under his guidance, her art deepens. Their relationship is tumultuous, a mixture of love, quarrel, and mentorship. But even when their intimacy fades, the lessons remain etched into her art. Edith Piaf, shaped by the discipline of Raymond Asso, never again sings casually. Every note becomes deliberate, every silence intentional. Marguerite Monod's contribution is gentler, but no less profound. Her music, tinged with melancholy and tenderness, seems to draw from the same well of longing that feeds Piaf's voice. The two women understand each other instinctively. Marguerite's melodies fit Edith as if composed for her soul alone. Songs like Hymne à l'amour and Milord would come later, but already the seeds are planted in this partnership. In a world often dominated by men, the bond between the two women is a quiet defiance, an alliance of sensitivity and strength that will endure long after others have left. With Asso and Monod at her side, Piaf's performances begin to change. Audiences notice the transformation. She is still raw, still intense, but now there is precision in her delivery. The little sparrow has learned to control her wings, to fly not chaotically, but with purpose. Her songs carry greater weight, each word sharpened, each pause heavy with meaning. She no longer merely survives on stage. She commands it. Yet even in this refinement, she never loses the tremor of the street. That is her genius. Unlike many performers who polish away their origins, Piaf carries hers proudly. Her accent remains, her gestures remain simple. Her voice still trembles with the unrefined cry of Belleville. It is this mixture, the discipline of art and the authenticity of the street, that makes her irresistible. She is both crafted and raw, both sculpted and wild. As audiences grow, as her fame spreads, Edith remains haunted by her past. In the quiet after performances, she still feels the loneliness of her childhood, the hunger of the streets, the absence of her mother. These wounds never heal, but rather deepen with success. For the more she is applauded, the more she feels the emptiness within. Perhaps this is why she clings so fiercely to love, why she demands so much from her lovers, why she fears abandonment more than anything. The songs she sings are not only for the audience, they are also for herself, a way of filling the silence that follows applause. Reflecting on this period, one sees the paradox of mentorship. Asso and Monod refine Piaf, but they do not tame her. They cannot. The fire within her is too fierce, the scars too deep. They can only give her form, teach her how to channel her storms into song, and perhaps that is enough. For in this balance between chaos and discipline, Edith Piaf becomes not merely a singer, but the embodiment of the chanson itself, personal, raw, confessional, larger than life. The candle burns lower, its wax dripping onto the sheet music, its flame trembling in the draft. The work of Asso and Monod is shaping Edith into something Paris has never quite seen before. A woman who does not merely sing songs, but becomes them. She stands on stage in her plain black dress, her body small, her voice immense, her eyes glowing with the intensity of lived truth. The audience, caught in her spell, hears not entertainment, but the echo of their own hidden sorrows. And yet, as the candle gutters, one hears the distant drumbeat of boots on cobblestones, the murmur of a world shifting toward darkness. For even as Edith Piaf is discovering her true voice, the storm of war gathers on the horizon, and soon she will be called to sing not only for herself and her lovers, but for a nation caught in occupation. The candle burns low, its flame trembling as if shivering against a draft, and in its final flicker, there comes another sound distant yet inexorable, the dull rhythm of boots striking cobblestones, the march of soldiers through the streets of Paris. The year is 1940, and France has fallen. The city, once vibrant with cafes, theaters, and cabarets, now lies under the shadow of German occupation. The banners of a foreign power hang where tricolors once waved, and the people of Paris live between silence and fear. Into this darkness steps Edith Piaf, the sparrow who refuses to stop singing. Her career, guided by Raymond Asso and Marguerite Monod, had been rising swiftly in the years before the war. She was no longer merely the girl of Belleville, but a name known across the city. Her songs played on radios, her figure recognizable on the stage. Now, in the shadow of occupation, this fame becomes both a shield and a danger. For what role does the singer play when a nation is under foreign rule? Is she to provide distraction, to ease suffering, to comfort, or to resist? These questions hover like smoke around Edith, and the answers are never simple. She continues to perform. Parisian cabarets remain open, for even under occupation people crave escape, and the occupiers themselves hunger for music. German officers sit in the same rooms as French civilians, their uniforms gleaming under the lights, their presence a silent reminder of defeat. Piaf sings before them all. Her voice carries over the smoke of cigarettes through the clink of glasses into hearts that beat with conflicting loyalties. Some whisper that to perform for Germans is collaboration. Others insist that to sing is simply to survive. Stories circulate, some claiming she aided prisoners of war, others saying she used her concerts to provide forged documents, helping men escape. These tales, like so much in her life, are veiled in ambiguity. Later defenders will say she sang in German camps, that her photographs with prisoners allowed escapees to pass as musicians. Critics argue these are myths, burnished after the war to cleanse suspicion. What is true? Perhaps both myth and truth intertwine, as they so often do in the life of Edith Piaf. One can imagine her standing on stage during these years, her black dress stark, her body frail, her voice filling the room. Did she feel the eyes of the occupiers on her, measuring her every gesture? Did she fear their suspicion, or did she relish the chance to stand before them and sing not for them, but despite them? For though her songs were not overtly political, they carried a weight of longing and defiance that could not be easily silenced. When Piaf sang of love, of sorrow, of loss, the audience heard more than romance. They heard the echo of their own captivity, their yearning for freedom, their grief for a nation humiliated. Art in such times is never simple. A song of love becomes a song of survival. A lament becomes a whisper of resistance. And sometimes, a performance that appears to serve the occupiers conceals another purpose entirely. Piaf, ever ambiguous, lived in this twilight. She was accused, suspected, defended, adored. When the war ended, she emerged scarred but not destroyed, her reputation battered by whispers, but her voice stronger than ever. The occupation years also brought her new connections. She moved among poets, actors, and musicians, many of whom were themselves navigating the dangerous balance between survival and betrayal. She sang not only in Paris but across Europe, traveling to perform even in places where danger seemed near. Each journey carried risks, and each concert left behind a trail of questions. Was she serving herself or her people, or both? Perhaps the answer lies in the complexity of her nature. Piaf never separated her life from her art, and in those years her life was entangled with both compromise and courage. And yet, amid the war, love did not abandon her. Edith never lived without passion. Even in the darkest times, she sought companionship, often recklessly, often destructively. She gave herself to lovers as if they were lifelines, demanding everything, offering everything in return. This hunger for intimacy, sharpened by the uncertainty of war, infused her performances with even greater urgency. When she sang of longing, it was not abstract. It was the voice of a woman who knew that tomorrow might not come, that the lover she clung to might be taken away by fate or by violence. For the audience, these qualities made her irresistible. In occupied Paris, where fear and silence ruled, Piaf's songs carried the emotions people dared not speak aloud. They could not openly declare defiance, but they could weep to her laments. They could not proclaim their yearning for freedom, but they could feel it in the trembling rise of her voice. Thus she became, paradoxically, both a distraction and a mirror. She soothed and she reminded, she consoled and she unsettled. When liberation finally came in 1944, Paris erupted in celebration. The Sparrow sang for the crowds, her voice rising above the bells and cheers. Yet liberation did not erase the questions of collaboration. Like many artists who had performed during the occupation, she faced scrutiny. Some accused her of serving the occupiers. Others defended her with tales of secret aid to the resistance. Once again, scandal shadowed her. But once again, her voice proved stronger than rumor. The people who had wept to her songs during the dark years did not abandon her. They returned, filling halls, demanding her presence, needing her voice to help them process the joy and sorrow of liberation. Looking back, one might ask, what is the role of an artist in times of oppression? Should they refuse to perform and risk silence? Should they sing and risk suspicion? Piaf's life offers no easy answer. She did both and neither. She compromised and defied. She survived and she sang. Perhaps that is all one can expect of a sparrow, small, fragile, darting through shadows, yet singing nonetheless. As the war years close, Edith Piaf stands at the threshold of a new era. The Sparrow who once sang for coins in Belleville has now sung for a nation in darkness, her voice carrying both suspicion and devotion. The occupation has scarred her, but it has also deepened her art, giving her songs a resonance that no peacetime could provide. And so, as the bells of liberation ring out across Paris, the sound that remains is not the echo of boots or the murmur of suspicion, but the faint drift of a harmonica played by a prisoner, somewhere far from home, remembering the voice of a little sparrow who sang even in the night. From that drifting note, we move forward into the years of post-war Paris, where Edith Piaf will rise higher still, her life entangled with poets, singers, and lovers, her passion burning as fiercely as her art. The harmonica's faint lament fades into silence, and from that silence rises another sound, the soft scrape of a chair across the floor of a smoky cafe in post-war Paris, the low murmur of voices, the clink of glasses, and beneath it all, the anticipation of a song. It is 1945, and the war has ended. Paris, though scarred, breathes again with restless energy. The city longs to forget the darkness, to return to laughter, to love, to nights that stretch into dawn. In this moment of rebirth, Edith Piaf stands at the center, her voice carrying the ache of the past into the hope of the future. The liberation has brought her both triumph and suspicion. Though whispers of collaboration had followed her, she emerges with her career intact, her voice stronger, her audience larger than ever. She sings not only in cabarets but in theaters, and soon her fame will cross the Atlantic. Yet even as the Sparrow ascends, her heart remains restless. Edith cannot live without passion. She craves love with the same urgency with which she craves song, and she gives herself to it as recklessly as she steps onto the stage. It is in these years that she meets poets and musicians who will leave indelible marks upon her life, among them a young man named Georges Moustaki. But before Moustaki, there are others. She surrounds herself with a circle of artists, singers like Yves Montand, who begins as her protégé and becomes her lover, Charles Aznavour, whom she mentors with fierce determination, actors, writers, and musicians who gather in her orbit, drawn by her magnetism. To be close to Piaf is to be pulled into a whirlwind, for she does not love lightly. She demands everything, she gives everything, and she consumes those around her with the same intensity with which she consumes her own strength. Some cannot endure it. Others are transformed by it. It is in this period that Piaf begins to see herself not only as a singer, but as a creator of destinies. She discovers talent, nurtures it, pushes it onto the stage, as if passing on a fragment of her own fire. She teaches Montand how to perform. She encourages Aznavour to write. She shapes careers as surely as she shapes her own songs. Yet in each of these relationships, art and love are entwined. The Sparrow cannot separate them. For her, to love is to sing, and to sing is to love. Enter Georges Moustaki, a young songwriter of Greek and Egyptian descent, with dark eyes, unkempt hair, and a quiet intensity that contrasts with Piaf's fiery presence. When they meet in the late 1940s, she is already famous, already scarred by scandal and passion, already carrying the weight of her reputation. He is younger, untested, still searching for his place in the world. Yet something in him speaks to her, and something in her calls to him. Their relationship begins not with the blaze of spectacle, but with the quiet intimacy of shared creation. Moustaki writes songs for her, among them Milord, which will become one of her most beloved pieces. His words, tender and observant, fit her voice as if they were born from it. She, in turn, gives him exposure, encourages him, lifts him from obscurity. Their love is not without turbulence. No love with Edith ever is. But it carries a different texture, less destructive than some of her other affairs, more collaborative, more entwined with art. Together they create, and through creation they love. To imagine Piaf and Moustaki together is to see two figures in a dim cafe, sheets of music spread before them, her cigarette smoke curling upward as she leans across the table, her voice testing a new melody, his pen scratching words that try to keep pace with her intensity. They quarrel, they laugh, they fall silent, they begin again. In those moments, art and passion are indistinguishable. Yet for Edith, love is never stable. She cannot live in moderation. Every relationship burns with the fever of necessity, as if she fears that without passion, life will dissolve into emptiness. Perhaps this fear is rooted in her childhood, in the abandonment she never overcame. Perhaps it is simply her nature. Whatever the cause, it drives her from lover to lover, each one leaving a trace upon her heart and her voice. Moustaki is one of many, yet his songs endure, woven into her repertoire, reminders of a bond that was as creative as it was romantic. The post-war years are also a time of expansion for Piaf. She tours widely, carrying her songs beyond France, into Europe, and eventually to America. In New York, she performs at the Versailles nightclub, later at Carnegie Hall. Her small figure and trembling voice conquering audiences who cannot understand her words, but who feel, unmistakably, the truth within them. She becomes not only the Sparrow of Paris, but a voice recognized across oceans. Yet even in triumph, she remains restless, forever searching for the embrace that will quiet her hunger. What is it about passion that both nourishes and destroys? Why do some souls, like Piaf's, find peace only in intensity? These questions linger, unanswered, as we watch her move from one affair to another, each one leaving its mark, each one feeding her songs. When she sings of longing, of abandonment, of devotion, she is not imagining, she is living. The boundary between life and art vanishes, and the audience, hearing her, believes utterly. But there is also fragility in this hunger. Each new love carries the risk of loss, and each loss deepens the wounds already present. Piaf's life is a pattern of ascent and collapse, triumph and despair. The loves she embraces give her new songs, new fire, but they also leave her broken when they end. This cycle, repeated again and again, shapes not only her private life, but the very timbre of her voice. By the late 1940s, there is already in her singing a tremor of exhaustion, a shadow of grief that will only grow deeper with time. Still, in this moment, with George Moustaki at her side, the Sparrow flies high. Her career thrives, her audience adores her. Her songs carry the blend of sorrow and passion that has become her signature. She is fragile in body, yet unyielding in spirit. And though scandal has not vanished, though whispers continue, she sings above them, louder, truer, more necessary than ever. As this chapter closes, the image that remains is of a cafe door swinging open in the night, the sound of footsteps on cobblestones, and Piaf and Moustaki walking together into the Paris air, their voices mingling, their laughter carried by the breeze. It is a fleeting moment, fragile and luminous, like so many in her life. And from that open door we will pass in the next part into the story of the great love that will define her forever, the boxer Marcel Cerdan, whose passion and tragedy will leave Piaf with songs that echo through eternity. The cafe door swings open, releasing a draft of cool night air into the smoke and laughter. And in that open doorway, another figure seems to stand waiting, though not yet visible in the glow of lamplight. He is a boxer, a man whose fists have known both triumph and punishment, whose fame is carried in newspapers and whispers, and whose path will soon cross with the little sparrows. His name is Marcel Cerdan, and in the story of Edith Piaf, he will become not only a lover, but a symbol, the embodiment of passion and tragedy joined together. It is 1948 when Edith meets Marcel. By then she has already known many loves, fleeting affairs, destructive passions, bonds that burned brightly and then dissolved into smoke. But Marcel is different. He is not a poet or a singer, not a man of words and fragile creativity. He is flesh and bone, strength and endurance. He enters her life with the solidity of the ring, a man of discipline and power, and yet behind his fists lies a gentleness that she, ever hungry for protection and tenderness, finds irresistible. Their meeting is said to have been charged with immediate recognition. Piaf, so small and fragile, was drawn to the presence of this man whose fame as a world champion boxer had already secured him a place in the hearts of France. Marcel, in turn, was captivated by her voice, her vulnerability, her intensity. Though he was married with children, though his life was already bound by responsibilities, he could not resist the force of the Sparrow's song. Their affair began quickly, and it consumed them both. For Edith, Marcel was more than a lover. He was the great love, the one she would cling to as if all her longing, all her past wounds, had converged in his embrace. She spoke of him with an urgency that startled even those who knew her well. She followed his matches, celebrated his victories, wept at his defeats. She sang for him, to him, about him. Her voice, already charged with passion, now carried an even deeper fire. To hear her during these years was to hear a woman singing not from memory or imagination, but from the present intensity of a love that filled her entirely. Marcel, too, was transformed. Though his life as a boxer was harsh, filled with training and travel, he allowed himself to be drawn into Edith's world of cafes, theaters, and music. Together they became a symbol of passion, their names whispered with fascination across Paris. Yet their love was not without torment. Edith demanded everything, and Marcel, torn between his family and his devotion to her, struggled to give it. Their meetings were often brief, stolen between obligations, but each encounter burned with a fever that seemed to erase all obstacles. The songs of this period reveal the depth of her devotion. When Piaf sang, audiences felt not merely a performance, but a cry of love aimed at one man. Hymne à l'amour, one of her most famous songs, was written for Marcel. In it, she promises to renounce the world for love, to cross death itself for devotion. The lyrics are extravagant, almost impossible in their intensity, but they were no exaggeration for Edith. They were her truth. She loved Marcel with a devotion that bordered on annihilation, and in her song she confessed it without hesitation. But fate, as often in her life, was cruel. On the 28th of October, 1949, Marcel boarded a plane in Paris to cross the Atlantic. He was flying to New York, where Piaf was waiting for him. She had begged him to come, unable to endure the distance between them. The weather was poor, the risks high, yet he came nonetheless. Somewhere over the Azores, the plane crashed, killing all on board. Marcel Cerdan, champion of the ring, lover of the Sparrow, was gone. When the news reached Edith, she collapsed. Her grief was total, overwhelming, a wound that would never fully close. She blamed herself, believing that her insistence on his coming had sealed his fate. Friends feared for her sanity. She wept, she raged, she dissolved into despair. Yet even in the midst of this devastation, she turned once more to song. Her mourning was not silent. It became music. When she sang after Marcel's death, her voice carried a rawness so profound that audiences wept openly. She did not perform. She bled. Hymne à l'amour became, after his death, not merely a declaration, but a lament. Each word, each note, carried the weight of her grief. Listeners who had loved and lost felt themselves reflected in her song, and Piaf, though shattered, gave them consolation. Perhaps this was her greatest gift, to transform personal agony into collective solace, to turn her own destruction into beauty for others. Yet one must ask, at what cost? Each performance tore at her wounds, deepening them even as it healed others. The tragedy of Marcel Cerdan became one of the central myths of Piaf's life. He was the love she could never replace, the man whose absence would haunt her until her death. Every romance after him carried his shadow. Every song of longing returned to his memory. For Edith, Marcel was not merely a chapter, he was the axis around which her later life turned. His loss hardened her addictions, deepened her need for love, and gave her voice its most devastating depth. One imagines her, alone after his death, sitting by a window in a foreign city, the sounds of life continuing outside while she sits in silence, clutching a photograph. Her body is frail, her eyes swollen from weeping, yet within her chest, the urge to sing rises again. She does not sing to entertain, not to survive, not even to be heard. She sings because it is the only way to bear the weight of grief. The sparrow, broken-winged, sings louder than ever. The image of the waves against the shore, carrying the memory of the plain, lost over the ocean, lingers in the mind. Each wave is like a heartbeat, each crash like a reminder of what has been taken. And it is with this image that we leave her, grieving yet singing, broken yet unyielding. For even in the face of devastating loss, Edith Piaf could not be silent. Her voice carried the name of Marcel Cerdan into eternity, binding love and tragedy so tightly that they could never again be separated. From the sound of those waves, we move onward into the years that follow, when Piaf, though scarred by grief, continues to create songs of loss that carry her own pain into the hearts of strangers. Her life becomes a living testament to the truth that beauty and suffering are often inseparable. The sound of waves against the shore lingers, each swell and retreat a reminder of the ocean that had swallowed Marcel Cerdan. And from that endless rhythm another sound emerges, fragile yet unbroken, the voice of Edith Piaf, carrying her grief into song. In the months and years after Marcel's death, she did not retreat into silence. Instead, she returned to the stage, though her body trembled and her heart was in ruins. For her, to sing was the only way to endure. Audiences who came to hear her in those days felt something they had never felt before. Her voice, always raw, now carried a wound that was unmistakable. Every note seemed torn from her very marrow. When she sang of longing, she was not imagining a lover. She was calling to one lost forever. When she sang of devotion, she was speaking from the grave of absence. Her grief was no performance. It was confession, made public in the only language she knew, music. Hymne à l'amour, composed before Marcel's death, became her anthem of mourning afterward. To hear Piaf sing it in the early 1950s was to hear a lament not only for a lover, but for all lost love, for every absence that left a heart hollow. Audiences wept openly, strangers holding hands in darkened halls, feeling their own griefs drawn into her voice. The song, once a declaration of passion, became a requiem, and Piaf, in singing it again and again, bound herself ever tighter to the memory of Cerdan. Yet even as she sang of loss, she created new works that revealed the paradox of her art. La Vie en Rose, written years earlier, resurfaced as a hymn to hope in the midst of sorrow. Its tender optimism, its promise of seeing life through rose-colored glasses, struck listeners as both naive and profound. To hear Piaf sing of joy while her own life was marked by tragedy was to feel the tension that defined her art, the ability to hold despair and hope in the same breath. Perhaps this was why she became so beloved. She did not deny sorrow, but neither did she surrender entirely to it. She sang of love as both ecstasy and wound, and in that contradiction, audiences recognized themselves. The years after Cerdan's death saw her performing tirelessly, even recklessly. She sang through illness, through exhaustion, through injuries sustained in car accidents. Doctors warned her to rest, to preserve her body, but she refused. Singing was not simply her profession, it was her existence. To stop would be to face silence, and silence meant the weight of grief pressing down without relief. Better to sing and collapse than to live without voice. This relentless drive gave her performances an urgency that few artists have ever matched. Audiences felt as if each concert might be her last, as if she was pouring the last reserves of her soul into every phrase. Songs of loss filled her repertoire. She sang of abandoned lovers, of farewells, of nights spent alone. She sang of devotion that endured beyond betrayal, of longing that outlasted hope. Each song seemed a variation on her own life, yet each carried a universal resonance. Those who heard her did not simply listen, they felt. They felt their own memories, their own wounds, stirred by the trembling cry of the sparrow. It was as though Piaf's voice had become a vessel for collective mourning, carrying the grief of thousands within the framework of her own. And yet, amid these laments she continued to love. Piaf could not live without passion. Even in the depths of mourning, she sought new lovers, new companions. Each one was drawn into her orbit, consumed by her need for intensity. Some remained briefly, others longer, but none could replace Marcel. His shadow haunted them all. For Edith, every kiss was haunted by memory, every embrace by absence. Her songs reflected this paradox, love renewed, but always under the shadow of loss. The stage itself became a kind of sanctuary. In the theater, she was not merely Edith, broken and grieving. She was Piaf, the sparrow whose voice could transform pain into beauty. Under the lights, dressed in her plain black dress, she stood small yet immense, her voice filling the hall with a power that seemed to transcend her frail frame. Audiences left feeling not only entertained but changed, as if they had shared in something sacred. For in those songs of loss they found a mirror of their own endurance. But the cost to Piaf was immense. Each performance drained her. Each song tore again at wounds that never healed. To sing of loss is to reopen it, to bleed afresh before strangers. And yet she could not stop. She was compelled, as if by fate, to turn her suffering into art. Perhaps she believed that in giving her pain to others, she might lighten it for herself. Or perhaps she simply knew no other way to live. The image that remains from these years is not only of applause and acclaim, but of roses left upon the stage, their petals wilting under the heat of the lights. Piaf would bend to gather them, clutching them as if they were offerings at a shrine, her small hands trembling, her eyes wet with unshed tears. She seemed both exalted and broken, both worshipped and desperately alone. The sparrow, adored by multitudes, was still searching for the one embrace that could quiet her restless heart. As the decade moved forward, her songs of loss became part of France's collective memory. They were sung in cafes, played on radios, hummed by workers on their way home. Piaf's voice was no longer just her own. It had become the sound of a nation reckoning with its wounds, of war, of love, of life itself. In this way, her grief transcended her private sorrow and entered the realm of myth. And yet behind the myth, the woman remained fragile. Her health was faltering, her addictions deepening, her body carrying the marks of too many accidents and too much strain. She leaned on alcohol, on morphine, on lovers, on faith. Each helped for a moment, then failed. But still she sang, always she sang. Her voice was the last refuge, the last unbroken part of her being. As this chapter closes, the stage is dark, the applause fading, a single rose lying on the boards where it has fallen from her hand. Its petals curl slowly, surrendering to the night air. And from that wilting rose we move forward into the years when the circle of addiction would tighten around her, drawing her further into frailty, even as her voice continued to soar. The rose lies on the stage, its petals curling inward, wilting under the heat of the lights, and as it fades, so too does Edith Piaf's fragile body begin to wilt beneath the weight of her own suffering. The applause still rises, the audiences still gather, but behind the curtain another story unfolds, a story of pain, of pills, of glasses raised too often, of a body collapsing even as the voice within it continues to soar. The years after Marcel Cerdan's death left Piaf not only grief-stricken, but physically broken. She had endured car accidents that shattered her bones, leaving her with chronic pain that never truly healed. Surgeries followed, long hours in hospital rooms where she lay small and pale beneath starched sheets, her hands twitching for a cigarette, her lips whispering fragments of songs, even in fever. Doctors gave her morphine to dull the pain, and from this began another chain of captivity. The drug that soothed her body also bound her, wrapping her days in a haze of dependency. Alongside morphine came alcohol. Piaf had always loved the warmth of wine, the conviviality of cafes, the way a glass in hand seemed to soften loneliness. But now the drinking grew heavier, more desperate. She drank not only in company but in solitude, chasing forgetfulness, chasing the illusion of relief. Glasses shattered, bottles emptied, mornings arrived with a hangover of despair. And yet, in the evening, she stepped again onto the stage, her small frame trembling, her eyes alight, her voice pouring forth as if untouched by weakness. The contradiction was staggering. Frailty off stage, fire on stage. Friends worried, lovers pleaded, doctors warned, but Piaf was stubborn. She lived as she sang, completely, without moderation, without pause. To ask her to temper herself was to ask her to be someone other than Edith Piaf. She could not, or would not, change. For her, intensity was life itself. To dull her passion would be a form of death, and she feared silence more than any ruin of the body. So she sang on, night after night, though her body was crumbling under her. There is a cruel poetry in this contrast. On stage she appeared eternal, her voice still piercing, still tender, still raw with emotion. In the dark halls under the spotlights, she seemed larger than life, a vessel of passion untouched by time. But off stage she was small, fragile, often bedridden, her hands shaking as she reached for medicine, her breath short, her bones aching. Those who loved her were caught between admiration and despair, watching her destroy herself, yet powerless to stop it. Her addictions did not erase her artistry. If anything, they deepened it. Each performance carried the tremor of desperation, the knowledge that she was giving more than her body could spare. Audiences felt this urgency. They sensed that each note might be torn from her at great cost, and they responded with devotion. To witness Piaf in those years was to witness a struggle between life and death enacted in song. It was both terrifying and sublime. Yet addiction is merciless. It isolates even as it consoles. Piaf's relationships grew stormy, her demands more frantic, her moods more unpredictable. Lovers who entered her world often found themselves consumed not only by her passion, but by her chaos. Some endured for a time, others fled, but always she returned to the stage, for it was the only place where the storm inside her found expression. Imagine her dressing room before a concert, bottles half drained, cigarette smoke curling in the stale air, a small figure hunched in a chair, head bowed. Then the call comes. The moment arrives, and she rises, adjusts her plain black dress, and steps into the light. The audience gasps, applauds, falls silent, and as she sings, the frailty vanishes. The chaos disappears. For a brief hour she is whole, and the pain is forgotten. Such was the paradox of Edith Piaf, the ruin of her body concealed by the radiance of her art. Why do some souls destroy themselves even as they create beauty for others? Why does passion so often carry its own poison? These questions linger, unresolved, as we watch her spiral downward yet sing ever higher. Perhaps the answer lies in her refusal to live half a life. Piaf could not accept moderation, could not endure silence. She needed to burn, even if burning meant destruction. The circle of addiction widened as the years passed. Morphine tightened its grip. Alcohol dulled and then inflamed her. Illness gnawed at her strength. And yet she recorded new songs, songs that would endure, songs that spoke of devotion, betrayal, endurance. Each one carried the unmistakable stamp of her truth. Her body might falter, but her voice astonishingly remained. It is as if all her strength, all her vitality, retreated into that one channel, abandoning her limbs but preserving her song. The audiences who saw her in these years often described the experience as unforgettable, almost sacred. They knew they were witnessing not only a performance, but a life lived to its very edge. She sang as if each concert were her last, as if she were pouring her entire existence into a single evening. And perhaps she was. The image that lingers from this period is of a glass slipping from her hand, shattering on the floor of a quiet room, shards glittering in the lamplight. Around her, silence. Within her, the need to sing once more. For though she was bound by the circle of addiction, she was also bound by the circle of song, and that circle was stronger. The sparrow could not be silenced, even when her wings were broken. And so, from the sound of glass shattering on stone, we move into the next chapter of her life, where amid her own decline, she turns outward again, discovering young talents, lifting others onto the stage, as if passing on the torch of her own relentless flame. The glass lies shattered on the floor, fragments glittering in the dim lamplight, each shard reflecting a piece of her brokenness. Yet from those pieces, Edith Piaf begins to gather something unexpected, not for herself alone, but for others. Even as her own body falters, her voice weakening under the strain of addiction and illness, she turns outward, seeking in new talent the possibility of renewal. Just as she had once been lifted from the streets by Louis Le Play, so now she becomes the one who lifts others, shaping the next generation with the fire of her own experience. Among those she draws close is a young man named Yves Montand. He is tall, handsome, with a natural charisma, and when Piaf discovers him in the mid-1940s, he is still unformed, a raw talent with more promise than polish. She sees in him a reflection of her younger self, uncertain, yet burning with potential. Taking him under her wing, she teaches him how to stand before an audience, how to hold silence, how to let a song become not a display, but a confession. Montand listens, learns, and transforms. Before long, he is no longer merely Edith's protégé, but her lover, for she cannot separate mentorship from passion. Their affair is brief but intense, and though it ends, he remains marked by her influence. He goes on to become one of France's great performers, always carrying within him the lessons of the sparrow who first believed in him. Another figure enters her circle, Charles Aznavour, a young singer and songwriter whose voice is unremarkable by conventional standards, nasal, unusual, lacking the charm of Montand's. Others doubt him, dismiss him, but Piaf does not. She sees past the surface, recognizing the poet within, the craftsman of words, the soul that will one day speak to France in a voice uniquely its own. She takes him into her world, even sharing her home with him for a time, pushing him to refine his craft. She teaches him the ruthlessness of honesty, the necessity of bearing oneself entirely before an audience. Aznavour later admits that without Piaf's faith, he might have abandoned his dream. With her, he perseveres, and he too becomes a giant of chanson. It is striking to imagine Edith in these moments, small and fragile, her body trembling from illness, her hands often clutching a cigarette or a glass, yet her eyes burning with the same intensity that had once carried her from the streets. She sits with these young singers, listening, correcting, demanding. She insists they strip away artifice, that they sing not with polish, but with truth. She does not care for beauty. She cares for authenticity. Her own career has been built on the raw cry of her soul, and she will accept nothing less from those she mentors. But to be close to Piaf is never simple. Her mentorship is entwined with chaos. She is generous, giving everything she has, money, time, connections, but she is also demanding, volatile, quick to anger, prone to jealousy. Those who live in her orbit must endure storms as well as gifts. Some cannot bear it and leave. Others remain, accepting the turbulence for the sake of her fire. In this way, Piaf becomes both a blessing and a trial for the young artists she shapes. Why does she give so much to others when her own life is so precarious? Perhaps it is gratitude for those who once lifted her. Perhaps it is an unconscious attempt to keep her own flame alive by passing it to new torches. Or perhaps it is simply her nature, incapable of living without passion, incapable of existing without drawing others into her storm. Whatever the reason, her role as mentor becomes one of the enduring parts of her legacy. The songs born from these collaborations enrich not only her protégés, but her own repertoire. With Aznavour, she develops works that deepen her art, bringing new textures, new insights. With Montaigne, she explores the theatricality of performance, the rhythm of presence. Each young artist she touches carries a piece of her voice forward, ensuring that even when her own body fails, the spirit of Piaf will endure in others. Yet the contradictions remain. She can inspire and wound in the same breath. She can lift a protégé to the stage with one hand and crush them with criticism the next. She demands loyalty, total and unquestioning, just as she demands from lovers. For Edith, art and love are inseparable, and both require complete surrender. Those who enter her world must give themselves entirely, or not at all. One can picture her in a rehearsal room, smoke filling the air, her frail body perched on a chair, her eyes fixed intently on a young singer standing nervously before her. She interrupts, corrects, urges them to strip the polish from their voice, to sing as if their life depends on it. The young singer hesitates, then tries again, their voice trembling with vulnerability. Piaf nods, satisfied. In that moment, she is both teacher and Sparrow, both broken and indomitable. Her mentorship is not confined to technique. She also teaches resilience, the stubborn refusal to surrender. She speaks of the streets, of hunger, of the necessity of persistence. She tells them that art is not luxury but survival, that to sing is to declare one's existence in a world that would otherwise overlook you. These lessons, born from her own life, are the foundation of her teaching. And they resonate, for the young singers know that her words are not abstractions, but lived truth. The paradox of Piaf is that even as she nurtures others, she continues to destroy herself. Her addictions deepen, her health deteriorates, her relationships collapse. Yet the fire that consumes her also illuminates those around her. This contradiction, so central to her being, becomes part of her gift to the next generation, the understanding that greatness and ruin often walk hand in hand. As the 1950s progress, Piaf's circle of protégés grows, and her influence spreads beyond her own performances. She becomes not only the voice of France, but also the godmother of Chanson, shaping its future through those she discovers and inspires. The sparrow, once lifted from the street by another's hand, has become the hand that lifts others. And yet, as we leave this chapter, the sound that lingers is not of applause or acclaim, but of young voices rehearsing in shadows, their notes uncertain, their courage unsteady. In the corner, Edith Piaf listens, her small figure wreathed in smoke, her eyes alight with a mixture of pride and ferocity. The sparrow, broken in body, continues to give her flame to others. From these voices in the shadows, we step outward again, onto a larger stage. The sparrow will no longer sing only for Paris. The world itself waits, and soon Edith Piaf will carry her cry across oceans to the grand halls of America, where she will test her voice against the vastness of the world stage. The sound of young voices rehearsing fades, their notes trembling in the dim light, and into that hush comes another echo, larger, grander. The murmur of a vast hall far from Paris, the rustle of an audience waiting, the sound of a foreign tongue filling the air. The Sparrow, once a street child of Belleville, now prepares to sing not for familiar cafes and theaters, but for the world. Her flight has carried her across oceans, and America awaits. It is 1947 when Edith Piaf first arrives in New York. The city is unlike anything she has known, immense, brash, restless, its skyline jagged against the sky, its streets alive with a different kind of energy than Paris. Here there are no narrow cobbled lanes filled with whispers of the past. Here the air crackles with ambition, commerce, and ceaseless noise. For Piaf, who has lived so much in intimacy, the scale of America is overwhelming. Yet she carries within her a voice that knows no boundaries. Her debut at the Versailles nightclub introduces her to American audiences. They do not understand her words, for she sings in French, but they understand her emotion. They see the small woman in her plain black dress, her eyes luminous, her hands lifting as if to catch invisible threads of memory, and they feel something stir within them. They hear longing, they hear loss, they hear love stripped bare. In a language foreign to them, they recognize the truth of their own hearts. The reception, however, is not without challenge. At first, some critics are puzzled. They describe her as strange, her voice as harsh, her presence as unpolished. In a land accustomed to polish and spectacle, Piaf seems out of place, but others sense her uniqueness. They call her authentic, unlike anything America has known. Slowly, word spreads. Audiences begin to return, not for glamour, but for truth. By the early 1950s, Piaf's reputation in America grows. Her concerts at Carnegie Hall seal her place as an international star. To see her in that great hall, so vast compared to the cabarets of Paris, is to witness the Sparrow transformed, yet unchanged. She is still small, still fragile, still in her black dress, but her voice rises to fill the immense space, carrying with it the same rawness that once silenced the streets of Belleville. The grandeur of the setting does not dilute her. Rather, it magnifies the paradox of her existence. She is a sparrow singing in a cathedral of sound, and the world listens. Yet Piaf's relationship with America is complicated. She is adored by audiences who respond to her intensity, but she is also lonely, disoriented in a land where she cannot easily move unseen, where the language and customs are foreign. She feels out of place amid the glitter of Broadway, the endless parties, the ceaseless rush. Her heart remains in Paris, in the cafes and theaters where her voice first found its echo. America gives her acclaim, but it cannot give her belonging. Still, she embraces the role of international star. She travels widely, singing in London, Berlin, South America, Scandinavia. Her voice, though rooted in the French chanson, becomes a universal language. Audiences who do not know her words still know her meaning. They see her frailty, they hear her cry, and they understand. Piaf becomes, in these years, not only the voice of Paris, but the voice of human vulnerability itself. It is remarkable to consider that this woman, so small, so broken in body, carried within her a presence that could fill the largest halls of the world. The paradox deepens. The frail sparrow conquers stages where giants have sung, not by volume or technique, but by the raw weight of emotion. Her voice is not merely heard, it is felt. And in that feeling, boundaries of language and culture dissolve. But international fame brings with it new demands, new pressures. The tours exhaust her, the constant travel worsens her health, the expectation to deliver night after night deepens her reliance on alcohol and morphine. The very acclaim that proves her greatness also accelerates her decline. And yet she does not stop. To stop is to face silence, and silence is unbearable. In America, she also encounters new loves, new companions, fleeting romances that add both sweetness and bitterness to her story. She cannot resist passion, no matter the cost. Even as she conquers audiences abroad, she remains a woman always searching, always hungry for the embrace that will quiet her restlessness. And each new love, each new loss, deepens the reservoir of her songs. To imagine her at Carnegie Hall is to picture a sea of faces turned toward the stage, a hush falling as the lights dim. Then she steps forward, tiny, almost swallowed by the vastness. For a moment, doubt stirs in the audience. Can this small figure command such a hall? But then she sings, and the doubt dissolves. The cry of the sparrow fills the space, rising, trembling, defiant. The applause that follows is thunderous, but Piaf does not sing for applause. She sings because she must, because to do otherwise would be to cease living. Her American triumphs, though brief in time, cement her place as a legend. She proves that her voice, born in the alleys of Belleville, belongs to the world. And yet, when the tours end, when the lights dim and the foreign cities fade behind her, she returns always to Paris. For it is in Paris that her soul resides, in its narrow streets, its smoky cafes, its restless nights. The sparrow may fly far, but it returns always to its nest. As this chapter draws to a close, the image that remains is of applause, fading in a grand hall, the sound of clapping hands dissolving into silence. And in that silence, Edith Piaf stands alone, her body weary, her heart restless, her eyes already searching for the next embrace, the next passion, the next song. From this fading applause, we step forward into the stormy years of her romances, where love once more becomes both nourishment and poison, and where her heart, unable to rest, continues to burn with the same fever that had carried her from the streets to the world stage. The applause fades, dissolving into silence, and in that silence another rhythm begins to stir, the restless beating of a heart that cannot live without passion. Edith Piaf, adored by audiences across oceans, returns from the grandeur of foreign halls to the intimacy of her private life. And there, as always, she searches not for acclaim, but for love. For Piaf, applause was fleeting. What she longed for was an embrace that would endure. Yet love in her life was never calm. It was a storm, both nourishment and poison, a fire that warmed her even as it consumed her. Her romances were many, and each bore the mark of her urgency. She could not love lightly. She demanded total devotion, a surrender as complete as the one she offered on stage. Lovers who entered her world soon discovered that she asked not for companionship, but for everything. She gave herself entirely, expecting the same in return. And when that expectation faltered, as it so often did, the relationship collapsed into quarrels, jealousy, and despair. Yet even in the ruins, she did not regret. To live without passion was unthinkable. After Marcel Cerdan, whose death left her with a grief that never lifted, Edith sought to fill the void with new loves, each one carrying a fragment of consolation, but never the fullness of what she had lost. She loved actors, singers, boxers, men of strength and men of poetry. Among them were Yves Montand, her protégé turned lover, Georges Moustaki, whose songs she carried into eternity, and countless others who flickered briefly in her orbit before vanishing. Each affair fed her songs, giving her voice fresh layers of longing, devotion, and lament. Her demands were fierce. She could be tender, showering her lovers with affection, with gifts, with unrelenting attention. But she could also be jealous, volatile, prone to rage when she felt neglected. For Edith, love was survival, and to lose it was to face the silence of abandonment she had known since childhood. Those who loved her often found themselves overwhelmed, unable to meet the immensity of her need. Yet they could not easily leave, for her magnetism was undeniable. To be loved by Edith Piaf was to be drawn into the very core of passion, to feel life burn more intensely than it ever had before. But love, like addiction, carried its poisons. Her relationships were often marked by conflict, by breakups and reconciliations, by the drama of passion lived without moderation. Friends watched helplessly as she gave herself to men who could not or would not give back what she demanded. Some exploited her fame, others feared her intensity, but all left her with deeper scars. Still, she returned again and again to love, as if each new embrace might finally quiet the restlessness within her. It is tempting to see her romances as destructive, but they were also creative. Each affair infused her performances with fresh fire. When she sang of devotion, of betrayal, of longing, she drew not from imagination, but from experience. Her voice carried the truth of nights spent waiting for a lover who never returned, of mornings filled with quarrel and reconciliation, of afternoons when passion burned so brightly it seemed the world itself might collapse. Audiences felt this truth. They believed her because she was not acting, she was living. What was it that drove her so relentlessly into the arms of others? Perhaps it was the hunger of the child abandoned by her mother, seeking endlessly the embrace she never received. Perhaps it was the echo of Curdon's death, a wound that could never heal, pushing her to seek replacements for what could not be replaced. Or perhaps it was simply her nature, a soul incapable of living without fire, destined always to burn, even when the flames consumed her. Her romances, stormy as they were, became part of her legend. The newspapers delighted in them, the public gossiped, the critics sneered. But for Piaf, they were not spectacles. They were necessities. She did not care for propriety or reputation. She cared only for love. And in this, as in her art, she lived without compromise. She was willing to be judged, willing to be condemned, so long as she could feel passion. Imagine her in those years, sitting in a dim cafe with a lover, her hands clasping his across the table, her eyes intense, her voice low but insistent. Around them, the city hums with ordinary life, but within that small circle, everything burns. Then picture the quarrel that follows. Her voice raised, tears streaming, accusations hurled, and then the reconciliation, the embrace, the fevered kiss. Each moment is lived at the highest pitch, each emotion carried to its limit. This was Edith Piaf's love, never calm, always storm. Her songs during this period reflect the turmoil. Some are tender, filled with the promise of devotion. Others are sharp, filled with bitterness and rage. All carry the unmistakable stamp of truth. She does not sing of love as an ideal. She sings of it as a wound, a hunger, a storm. And it is precisely this unvarnished truth that makes her voice eternal. For who among us has not known the storm, the mingling of joy and despair in the same embrace? As the 1950s progress, her romances become ever more entangled with her addictions. Lovers come and go, some attempting to rescue her, others dragged down by her chaos. Yet through it all, the stage remains constant. Whatever her private turmoil, she continues to sing, to give herself entirely to the audience. For Edith, the stage is the one place where love, loss, passion, and pain can be transformed into something enduring. The image that lingers from this chapter is of a lover walking away at dawn. The street quiet, the sparrow left alone in the fading light. Her small figure stands in the doorway, her eyes wide with both defiance and despair. She will grieve, she will rage, she will seek another, and she will sing, always she will sing, turning each storm into melody. From that departing figure at dawn, we move forward into the years when her body itself begins to betray her, when illness and frailty press harder, when even her indomitable will cannot hold back the collapse. Yet even as her body breaks, her voice will continue to rise, defying the silence that waits for all. The dawn light lingers on the empty street. the figure of a lover fading into distance, and as that image dissolves, another emerges, the fragile body of Edith Piaf, standing at the edge of her strength, her small frame trembling against the weight of years lived too fiercely. Passion had filled her songs, but it had also left its mark upon her bones, her nerves, her veins. By the mid-1950s, her body, once animated by restless fire, was collapsing under the strain of addiction, illness, and relentless devotion to performance. Car accidents had left her with injuries that never healed. Bones broken, joints aching. She carried the constant reminder of fragility in every step. Operations multiplied, each one promising relief, each one leaving new scars. The morphine prescribed for her pain offered temporary comfort, but its grip grew tighter, binding her in dependency. Alcohol blurred the edges of her suffering, yet deepened the decline. Friends looked at her with alarm, seeing not the vibrant Sparrow of the stage, but a pale, exhausted woman, her hands trembling, her breath short, her eyes shadowed. And yet, in the theater, she appeared transformed. Under the lights, the weakness fell away. Audiences saw not a patient, but a force, not a frail woman, but a vessel of song. Her black dress hung loosely upon her frame, her arms seemed thin as twigs, but her voice rose as if untouched by decay. It was as though all the strength that had left her body had taken refuge in her voice, pouring out in torrents of sound that silenced halls. The contrast was startling. Off stage, she could scarcely walk. On stage, she seemed eternal. Those who knew her in these years spoke of her willpower with awe. Doctors begged her to rest, to retire, to preserve what little health she had left. She refused. To rest was to face silence, and silence was unendurable. She insisted on performing, often against all advice, often carried to the stage by others, only to stand upright before the microphone, her voice steady while her body shook. The Sparrow's wings were broken, but still she flew. Her illness became part of her art. The frailty visible to audiences gave her songs an even deeper poignancy. When she sang of suffering, they believed her completely, for they could see it etched into her face, hear it trembling in her voice, feel it in the pauses between notes. Her body itself became a kind of costume, the truest symbol of her art. She embodied in flesh what her songs had always declared, that beauty and pain are inseparable, that love is both ecstasy and wound, that life is fragile yet unyielding. One can imagine her in those years, backstage before a concert, slumped in a chair, her body weak, her head bowed. Then the call comes. The moment arrives. She rises slowly, leaning on those around her, each step a struggle. Yet when she reaches the stage, she stands tall, alone, gripping the microphone as if it were her lifeline. The first note escapes her lips, and the hall falls silent. The Sparrow sings, and in that moment she is whole again. But the collapse of her body also deepened her dependence on others. Lovers and friends became caretakers, nurses, protectors. Some endured with devotion, others withdrew under the strain. Her relationships grew more complicated, entangled with her illnesses and her demands. Yet always, at the heart of her being, there remained the hunger for love, the desire for intimacy, the need for passion. Even as her body failed, her heart continued to burn. The press watched her decline with fascination, sometimes cruel, sometimes sympathetic. Stories circulated of her being carried to the stage, of collapsing afterward, of singing through unbearable pain. Audiences, too, responded with a strange mixture of devotion and pity. They loved her more for her fragility, seeing in her the reflection of their own mortality. She became, in her suffering, a mirror of the human condition. Weakness transformed into strength, despair transformed into song. Why did she continue when others would have surrendered? Perhaps because her identity was inseparable from her art. Without singing, she was not Edith Piaf. To stop would have been to die in spirit, even before the body followed. And so she continued, refusing rest, defying decline, pouring every remaining fragment of herself into her performances. Each concert became not only a gift, but a sacrifice, a fragment of life offered to the audience. The paradox of Edith Piaf in these years is that her decline only deepened her greatness. The brokenness of her body made her songs more powerful, more convincing, more necessary. She no longer sang as a woman interpreting love. She sang as one who had been broken by it, as one who had lived every word. Audiences left not only moved but haunted, carrying with them the image of a sparrow who refused to stop singing even as her wings gave way. The image that closes this chapter is simple yet unforgettable. Piaf, coughing into a handkerchief backstage, her body racked with pain, yet moments later stepping into the light, her eyes blazing, her voice rising to fill the hall. The cough echoes in the silence after the song, a reminder that the sparrow is mortal, even as her voice seems immortal. And from that cough breaking the silence, we move forward into the tender, unlikely love that would come in her final years, her marriage to Theo Sarapo, a man 20 years younger whose presence would bring her both controversy and companionship as she faced the last descent of her life. The cough lingers in the silence, echoing like a reminder that even the strongest voice belongs to a mortal body. Out of that silence, another image forms. Two hands clasped beneath the soft glow of a lamplight, one frail and trembling, the other young and steady. The woman is Edith Piaf, small and worn, her frame marked by decades of passion, addiction, and illness. The man is Theo Sarapo, tall, handsome, 20 years younger, his dark hair framing a face still fresh with youth. In the improbable joining of these two figures, another chapter of the Sparrow's story unfolds. It is 1962 when Edith marries Theo Sarapo, whose birth name was Theophanis Lamboukas. He is a hairdresser by trade, though he also sings and acts, still seeking his path in the world. To many, their union seems strange, even scandalous. The tabloids feast on the disparity of their ages, the sight of the legendary Piaf, broken in body, joined to a man young enough to be her son. Whispers of opportunism circle around him. Some say he marries her for fame, for fortune. Others scoff at the idea that such a fragile woman could still inspire passion. But those who witness them closely speak of tenderness, of devotion, of a companionship that, for all its controversy, carries a quiet sincerity. For Piaf, Theo represents something she has always sought: protection, closeness, the warmth of a body beside her in the night. He cares for her, helps her walk, drives her to performances, supports her through illness. In his arms she finds not the blazing passion of Cerdan, not the storm of Montand or Moustaki, but a gentler comfort, the reassurance of not being alone. In her final years, this is perhaps the greatest gift he can give her. They sing together, their voices weaving across the stage, his deeper tones supporting her fragile cry. À quoi ça sert l'amour, their duet, becomes a poignant testament to their union. The song asks, "What good is love?" and answers itself with both irony and truth. Love wounds, love fades, but still, without it, life is empty. To hear them sing these lines together, she frail and trembling, he steady and youthful, is to feel both the absurdity and the beauty of their bond. It is less a performance than a confession, two voices acknowledging the pain of love while clinging to it nonetheless. Critics mocked, audiences gossiped, but Edith did not care. She had never cared for propriety, never lived by the rules of respectability. She loved as she sang, completely, defiantly, without shame. And in Theo she found the courage to continue even as her body gave way. He became her anchor, her caretaker, her partner in the face of decline. If he gained fame by standing beside her, so be it. What mattered to Piaf was not what others thought, but the simple fact of his presence. One must imagine them in their small apartment, away from the eyes of the public. She sits in a chair, frail, her body racked with pain, her hands shaking. He kneels beside her, holding her fingers gently, whispering comfort. In such moments, the disparity of age dissolves, and what remains is companionship, the universal human need to be held, to be seen, to be loved even in frailty. Piaf, who had lived so long in storms of passion, now finds in this companionship a quieter flame, one that warms rather than burns. Yet even here, drama is not absent. Their relationship, like all of Piaf's, is marked by quarrels, reconciliations, intensity. She cannot live without intensity, even in weakness. But the quarrels are followed by tenderness, by renewed devotion. In Theo, she finds someone willing to endure the storms, to remain by her side when others might have fled. This endurance is itself a form of love, one that, though less spectacular than her great romances, carries its own quiet nobility. The duet with Sarapo captures the paradox of Piaf's life. The sparrow, near the end of her flight, sings not alone, but with another, their voices intertwined. It is as though she is passing on a fragment of her flame, ensuring that her song continues beyond her own breath. And yet, the poignancy lies in the knowledge that her voice, though still soaring, is carried by a body too weak to sustain it much longer. The contrast deepens the pathos, making each note a farewell disguised as music. Observers of the time described Piaf in these last years as a shadow of her former self, physically, yet spiritually, undiminished. She weighed scarcely 90 pounds, her frame so small she seemed almost childlike. She often required help to walk, her steps faltering, her hands clutching for support. Yet when she stood before a microphone, she became immense. The voice, though roughened by years of strain, carried a depth of feeling unmatched. Audiences who saw her then felt both awe and sorrow. They knew they were witnessing the final notes of a legend, sung through a body already claimed by decline. Why did she marry Theo? So young, so different from her. Perhaps because, for all her defiance, she feared loneliness more than death. She had known abandonment as a child, loss as a lover, isolation in illness. To face the end alone was unbearable. In Theo, she found not immortality but comfort, not passion that devoured but companionship that sustained. And in her final years, that was enough. As we linger on this chapter, the image that remains is of two hands clasped beneath the lamplight, one frail, one strong, shadows merging on the wall. Their love may not have silenced the gossips, but it silenced for a time the loneliness that had haunted Edith all her life. The sparrow, who had flown through storms of passion and loss, at last found a perch, however fragile, in the steady hand of another. From these clasped hands under lamplight, we move forward to the stage once more, where despite illness and warning, despite collapse and frailty, Edith Piaf insists on singing her final performances, her voice defiant against the silence that loomed ever closer. The two hands remain clasped in the lamplight, their shadows merging on the wall, and from that quiet intimacy, we move once more to the stage, where Edith Piaf, frail beyond her years, insists on standing before her audience. Her doctors plead with her to stop, her friends beg her to rest, her body itself demands surrender, yet she refuses. For Piaf, silence is death, and while breath still fills her chest, she will sing. It is the early 1960s, and her health is in steep decline. She weighs scarcely more than a child, her frame bent, her eyes sunken, her skin pale. Rheumatism gnaws at her joints, her liver and kidneys suffer under years of strain, her heart falters. Often she must be helped to the stage, supported by Theo Sarapo or by stagehands, her steps uncertain. Yet when she reaches the microphone and the first note escapes her lips, the frailty falls away. Audiences, stunned by her appearance, are overwhelmed by the transformation. They expect weakness, but they hear strength. They expect silence, but they hear eternity. Each performance in these final years carries the weight of farewell. Her voice is no longer the voice of youth, raw and fierce. It is deeper, rougher, cracked by age and illness, yet filled with even greater truth. When she sings, the hall falls utterly silent. People lean forward, listening not to a performance, but to a testament. They sense that she is giving them her very last reserves, that each note is torn from her at immense cost. This knowledge makes the songs unbearable and sublime at once. In 1961, she gives what many consider her final triumph at the Olympia in Paris. The hall is filled with admirers, critics, friends, strangers, all aware that they are witnessing something historic. Piaf, almost too frail to stand, delivers a program that silences her doubters. She sings with such intensity, such conviction, that even the harshest critics are moved to tears. When she performs Non, je ne regrette rien, her voice breaks through the hall like a declaration carved into stone. No, I regret nothing. The words carry not only melody, but the weight of a lifetime lived without compromise. In that moment, the song ceases to be merely a chanson. It becomes a creed, a final testament. The audience, electrified, erupts in applause, many rising to their feet. Some weep openly, others clap until their hands ache. They know they have heard not only music, but a soul laid bare. And Piaf, standing tiny and trembling under the lights, allows herself a faint smile. She has given all, and all has been received. Her later concerts in France and abroad continue this pattern. She collapses off stage. She faints between songs. She is carried to and from the microphone. Yet always when the music begins, she rises, her voice defying the silence that presses in on her. Audiences respond with devotion, aware that each performance might be her last. They come not merely to hear her sing, but to bear witness to her defiance, to share in the final fire of her life. There is something both heroic and tragic in these final performances. Heroic, because they reveal her indomitable will, her refusal to surrender even as her body betrays her. Tragic, because they hasten her decline, each concert draining what little strength remains. Yet Piaf would not have it otherwise. She cannot imagine life without song, and so she chooses to spend her final strength in this way, burning herself out before strangers who love her. Why do audiences respond so deeply to a singer at the edge of death? Perhaps because in such moments, art is stripped of all artifice. Piaf no longer sings for fame, nor for money, nor even for acclaim. She sings because it is the essence of her being. Each note carries not only emotion, but mortality. To hear her is to be reminded of one's own fragility, one's own inevitable end, and yet also of the beauty that can emerge from frailty. Her final concerts are less performances than rituals, where the audience and the singer together confront the mystery of life and death. Imagine her in those moments, the lights dim, the hall silent, the microphone standing alone at the center of the stage. She steps forward slowly, her small figure dwarfed by the vast space, her black dress hanging loose on her thin frame. She grips the stand, closes her eyes, and begins. The voice that emerges is cracked, imperfect, trembling, but true. The hall is filled, yet it feels as though she sings to each person individually, confessing, consoling, commanding. Then the final note lingers. The silence rushes in, and the applause breaks like thunder. She bows, small and fragile, and disappears into the wings, collapsing into the arms of those who carry her away. For Edith Piaf, these final performances are both gift and farewell. She does not announce them as such. She never declares that she is finished. But the audience senses it. Each song is tinged with the awareness of ending, each note heavy with mortality. To be present at these concerts is to participate in the closing of a life, to share in the last cries of a sparrow who refuses to be silent. The image that remains as this chapter closes is of the microphone standing alone in the empty hall after the audience has gone, the stage dim, the air still vibrating with echoes of her voice. The sparrow has sung again, though her body trembled, though her strength waned. Each performance has been a farewell disguised as a greeting, a defiance against the silence that waits. From that empty microphone in the darkened hall, we move forward into the quiet that follows, into the moment when the sparrow can sing no more, when death at last claims the voice that defied it for so long. The microphone stands alone in the darkened hall, its metal gleaming faintly beneath the last light, the silence around it thick with echoes of her vanished voice. From that silence, we move into the quiet of her final days, when the sparrow could no longer rise to meet the stage, when her frail body, battered by years of passion and defiance, at last demanded surrender. It is 1963. Edith Piaf is only 47, yet she carries the weight of a lifetime lived too fiercely. Her body has grown smaller, her bones fragile as glass, her face hollowed by illness. Friends who visit her are shocked by her appearance, scarcely recognizing the woman whose voice still rings in their memory. She spends much of her time in the south of France, in Grasse, sheltered in a villa where the Mediterranean air is thought to be healing. But even here, amid sunlight and flowers, her health declines steadily. The doctors know the truth. Her liver, her kidneys, her heart, each is failing, Years of morphine and alcohol, years of accidents and exhaustion have taken their toll. They tell her to rest, to give up singing, to prepare for the inevitable. But Piaf, even now, resists. She talks of future concerts, of returning to the stage once more. She cannot imagine life without the possibility of song, yet her strength fails her daily, and the stage, once her sanctuary, recedes beyond her reach. By her side is Theo Serapo, her young husband who tends to her with devotion. He carries her when she cannot walk, he comforts her when the pain is too great, he shields her from the intrusions of the outside world. Others, too, remain loyal, friends, nurses, companions. But for all their presence, Piaf is lonely. She has always been lonely, even amid applause, even amid lovers. In these last days, the loneliness deepens. She clings to faith, to her small image of Sainte Thérèse, praying as she once did as a child when her sight was restored. Yet her prayers, though fervent, do not halt the decline. On the 10th of October, 1963, Edith Piaf dies in Grasse. She's only 47, though her life has carried more intensity than many who live twice as long. The news spread swiftly across France. Paris, the city that had once lifted her from its streets, now weeps. She had been many things: scandalous, tempestuous, reckless, adored. But above all, she had been theirs, the voice of Paris, the soul of its sorrows and joys. Her death is felt not only as the loss of a singer, but as the extinguishing of a part of the city itself. There is controversy, even in her passing. The Catholic Church hesitates to grant her a funeral mass, citing her scandalous life, her tumultuous loves, her reputation. Some argue that she has not lived in accordance with the faith, yet the people do not wait for permission. They gather by the tens of thousands, filling the streets, pressing shoulder to witness her final journey. Traffic halts, silence falls, and all of Paris seems to pause. No scandal, no whisper, no judgment can erase what she has given them. Her voice had sung their sorrows, and now they repay her with presence. On the day of her funeral, the streets overflow. Mourners line the boulevards, some weeping openly, others standing in reverent silence. Flowers are thrown, prayers whispered, songs hummed under breath. It is said that more than 40,000 people join the procession, the largest Paris has seen since the liberation. In death, Piaf becomes what she had always been in song, the embodiment of collective memory, the voice through which countless hearts had spoken. Her coffin is small, like her body, yet it carries a weight immense with meaning. Friends and lovers walk behind it, some in tears, others in stunned silence. The city watches. The Sparrow, who once sang for coins beneath a street lamp, is carried now as a queen of sorrow, mourned not for her scandals, but for her gift. Why does the death of a singer move so many? Perhaps because in her songs people found pieces of their own lives. Piaf did not sing of distant fantasies. She sang of the hunger, the longing, the despair, and the fleeting joy that everyone knows. To lose her is to lose not only an artist, but a vessel of shared humanity. Her funeral is not only hers, it is also the mourning of the people for their own lost loves, their own endured sufferings, their own fragile endurance. After the funeral, Edith Piaf is laid to rest in Père Lachaise Cemetery, among poets, painters, and dreamers. Her grave is simple, unpretentious, marked by her name. Yet visitors come endlessly. They bring flowers, they whisper prayers, they sing her songs softly to the stones. The sparrow, though buried, continues to sing in the voices of others, and in the years that follow, her legend only grows. Her life, so entangled with scandal and tragedy, becomes myth. Her songs, recorded and preserved, continue to echo across time. New generations who never saw her perform hear her voice and feel as though she sings directly to them. The language may be foreign, but the truth is universal. Love, loss, regret, devotion, these know no boundaries. The bells of Paris toll faintly in the distance as this chapter closes, their sound mingling with the memory of a voice that will not fade. The sparrow is gone, yet her cry remains, echoing in the hearts of those who still turn to her songs for solace. And from the tolling of those bells we pass into the final chapter of her story, not of her life, but of her legacy, the echo of eternity that ensures Edith Piaf continues to sing, even in silence. The bells of Paris toll faintly, their sound drifting over the rooftops, mingling with the memory of a voice that no longer fills the air. The sparrow has fallen, her body laid to rest in Père Lachaise, yet even as the earth closes over her, her cry lingers. Death has silenced her lips, but not her song, for Edith Piaf's voice does not belong only to the years she lived. It belongs to eternity, woven into the fabric of human memory, carried forward by those who hear her still. Her legacy is not measured in monuments or statues, but in the trembling of a heart when her voice emerges from a record, a radio, a whisper in a cafe. Even those who never saw her, who were born after her passing, feel her presence in the air when her songs play. There is something in that raw, imperfect, unyielding cry that cuts across time. It speaks to longing and survival, to the ache of love and the endurance of sorrow, to the resilience of those who have nothing but refuse to surrender. Piaf sang her life, and in doing so, she sang the lives of countless others. Consider how her songs move across generations. La Vie en Rose, with its tender promise of seeing the world through the glow of love, continues to be sung by voices across the world, each one carrying her tenderness into new languages and new ears. Hymne à l'amour, born of her devotion to Marcel Cerdan, still pierces with the intensity of a love that defies death. Non, je ne regrette rien, recorded near the end of her life, has become an anthem not only for her, but for all who seek to face existence without apology. These songs have left the cabarets and theaters of Paris and have entered the collective soul, where they remain unbroken by time. Her influence extends beyond music. Piaf is remembered as an emblem of survival, a reminder that greatness does not always come from privilege or ease. Born into poverty, abandoned, raised in hardship, scarred by scandal, broken by illness, she nevertheless carried her voice into the world and refused to be silenced. Her life was a defiance against circumstance, and in this she has inspired not only singers, but all who face struggle. She is proof that beauty can arise from suffering, that fragility can house power, that even a sparrow can fill the sky. Of course, her life was not free from controversy. The scandals of her loves, the whispers of wartime collaboration, the chaos of her addictions, these remain part of her story. But perhaps it is precisely this mixture of flaw and greatness that makes her eternal. She was not untouchable, not perfect, not a polished idol. She was human, marked by weakness and contradiction, and it was this humanity that gave her voice its authenticity. To hear Piaf is to hear not only art, but life itself, unvarnished and unashamed. Imagine in some quiet room today, a person sitting alone as a record turns, the crackle of the needle followed by the rise of Piaf's voice. Outside, the world is different. New buildings, new wars, new loves. But inside, the listener feels what Paris once felt, what audiences in New York once felt, what lovers once felt when Edith sang only for them. Time collapses. Her voice bridges past and present, reminding us that sorrow and joy are eternal companions, that love and loss remain unchanged by centuries. Why do we return to her again and again? Perhaps because her voice speaks not to the polished surface of life, but to its core. She does not hide suffering. She transforms it. She does not deny despair. She sings through it. And in that act of transformation lies her gift. Each listener, hearing her, feels less alone in their own struggles. Each listener recognizes themselves in her trembling cry. Her grave at Père Lachaise remains a place of pilgrimage. Visitors leave flowers, notes, photographs. Some sing softly to her stone. Others stand in silence, hearing in memory the songs that once filled their youth. The cemetery is filled with poets, painters, philosophers, yet it is often Piaf's resting place that draws the most pilgrims. For she was not only an artist of words or images, she was an artist of the human heart, and her work remains alive each time it is heard. As the decades pass, her legend only deepens. Films are made, books are written, voices retell her story. Yet beyond all interpretations, beyond all myth-making, the essence remains in the recordings themselves. To press play and hear her is to meet her again, alive, fragile, fierce. The sparrow sings still, not as a memory, but as a presence. And so, in the end, Edith Piaf's story is not one of death, but of echo. She lived with intensity. She loved with abandon. She suffered without concealment, and she gave all of it to her art. Her life was brief, her body frail, but her voice was eternal. It rises still, trembling but unbroken, carrying the sorrows and hopes of all who listen. The bells of Paris fade now into silence. The streets empty. The night deepens. Yet in that silence, if one listens closely, a faint voice can still be heard. It is the cry of the little sparrow, carried on the wind, weaving through memory, reminding us that love, however fleeting, leaves behind an eternal song.